legitimacy 10 years after the BICI report, Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry. And as you know, we've just passed International Human Rights Day on the 10th of December. These issues are in our mind for that. And of course, tomorrow and the following day, Martyrs' Day and the Bahrain National Day are also on our mind. So we've taken this opportunity, for those of you who aren't muted, please mute, which want to take this opportunity to think about where we are 10 years later in this process, whether there has been a kind of accountability that was provided for in the BICI and the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry reports. There was some prosecutions that followed. I think we'll be discussing that. Or whether there's other things that we need to think about, other options that we need to think about, whether in fact the question is not so much a Magnitsky-related one, which we'll come to in a short while, but rather maybe more of a political one where individual states, partner states of Bahrain and so on, need to take bigger action to call into question the political actions, the legitimacy and that element of accountability. Joining us tonight and perhaps give a slightly bigger introduction when they start, and I'll do it in the order that they'll be speaking. Joining us tonight are Amelie Bamford, who was a researcher with Salam for Democracy and Human Rights, has now gone on to a postgraduate degree at King's College in European Studies. And she wrote the report which will be presented this evening on what are the Magnitsky provisions, how do they work, where do they work, what are some of the pros and cons of what they're about. Her work now, her interests now relate to Romania and about the ineffectiveness or maybe effectiveness of the criminal justice system in Romania in respect to crimes against humanity. After Amelie speaks and introduces her paper, I'll ask for the reactions to what she had to say about Magnitsky and other issues relating to that. I'll ask that of a professor in the School of Law at the University of Essex, Carla Firstman. She is a barrister and has worked with international justice and accountability mechanisms for quite some time. In that regard, worked with Redress, a UK-based NGO at the time of the BICI, the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry process, and latterly actually served as a I think the correct term would be a panel member, as that's judge on the Aban Tribunal, which was a people's tribunal that looked at accountability for actions in Iran taken by the Iranian government in November 2019, and she's got her fingers in other pies, including, for example, an NGO relating to Libya. She's on the advisory committee for Lawyers for Justice in Libya. Following Carla's reaction, thoughts on what constitutes accountability, international justice, those sort of issues, whether Magnitsky is right or not, we'll turn to a former parliamentarian from Bahrain itself. That's Matar Ibrahim Ali Matar, and he was caught up in all the events in 2011 and took part in the demonstrations. What can I say? I mean, we'll hear more about your experiences shortly, Matar. But what I'd also want to explore with Matar is his experiences as taking up complaints through the Interparliamentary Union, and as we'll discuss a little bit later on, this is the kind of the kind of UN recognized body in respect to the affairs of parliamentarians and the struggles they face. So he raised the complaint through that body, and it has been taken to the government of Bahrain, which is obliged to respond, and indeed has responded. So that's something I want to explore. And then moving on, last but certainly not least, the French investigative journalist Marc Pelas. He has an advanced degree in mathematics from a university in Paris, and worked between 1970 and 1981, I think, as an economist. But more particularly for the purposes of this evening's conversation, he has worked, goodness me, since at least 1973, writing for Le Monde Diplomatique about the Gulf, in particular Bahrain, Oman. He's co-authored a book or a documentary film, rather, in 1979-80 about the Omani independence movement. So, man with a lot of experience in the Gulf, and so hearing his depth of experience on this, as this too will be valuable. Then we hope to have a discussion. Those who join on the Zoom link can put forward their questions if I'm able to see them, I hope. Also, I think we will have people monitoring Twitter and indeed the YouTube stream for any questions or comments that people wish to make. And with that, having taken about 6 minutes of this time, I'm going to turn it over to Amelie, Salam DHR's former researcher, now student, to talk about what are the Magnitsky provisions. Just take us through what they are, why, how did they come about, what are they for, and maybe some pros and cons of what those Magnitsky provisions are and whether they have any sort of relevance for the Bahraini experience. Thanks, Amelie. Over to you.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me today and letting me talk about my report. It's really nice to see some familiar faces. But getting on to my report. Today's discussion will be centered around the Magnitsky Act and similar sanctions framework found across the globe. The Magnitsky Legislation refers to laws providing for governmental sanctions against foreign individuals who have committed human rights abuses or have been involved in significant corruption. Firstly, I will begin by providing a little summary of how Magnitsky provisions came to exist. The initiation of these provisions came under a bipartisan law during Obama's administration in 2012 after relentless campaigning by Magnitsky's former American colleague, Bill Browder. Magnitsky was a lawyer amongst many things. He was investigating a large-scale Russian tax fraud case alongside Browder. But he was arrested in 2008 after he informed the Russian government of his findings. The US and the UK claimed he was arrested on fabricated evidence in an effort to conceal allegations of high-level corruption. However, while in pre-trial detention a year after his arrest, he died following alleged mistreatment. In response, utilising the provisions of the Magnitsky Act, 18 Russian officials thought to be involved in his death were barred from entering the US, using bank systems there, and assessing any assets they had in the country. Following the success and the popularity of the provisional Magnitsky Act, Congress chose to expand its regulations in the Global Magnitsky Act in 2016, allowing sanctions to be placed upon human rights abusers in other parts of the world, including those in China and Saudi Arabia. A widespread international response was seen after 2016, seen in Canada, closely following the US in introducing similar sanctions framework in 2017. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania also adopted Magnitsky sanctions of their own. Australia also launched plans in 2018, but they were stalled by the COVID-19 pandemic. Post-Brexit, the UK Foreign Secretary Raab issued the global human rights sanctions on July 2020 to 49 individuals and organisations involved in the most notorious human rights violations in recent years. The UK's sanctions framework includes prevention from entering the country, deterrence of channeling money through UK banks, being barred from profiting from the UK economy. These sanctions are introduced with the hope to promote compliance with international human rights law and respect for human rights. The UK government published a policy paper highlighting a non-exhausted list of factors to be taken into account in deciding whether a person should be considered for designation. These included UK human rights priorities, a nature of a victim's seriousness of conduct, international profile and any collective action taken, involvement of non-state actors, status and connections of persons involved and effectiveness of other measures, including law enforcement. The criteria surrounding designations include those who commit unlawful killings or gross violations of human rights, such as torture or cruel and inhumane punishments or treatment, those who facilitate, incite, promote, or support these abuses, and those who financially profit from human rights violations. Further to this, imposed sanctions were also introduced by the European Union in 2020, titled in the legislation, the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions Regime. This sanction framework also follows a very similar framework to that of the US's and the UK's. Now I'm going to go on to advantages and disadvantages of Magnitsky style provisions, and we're going to start with advantages. So the advantages of these type of provisions are it showcases commitment to a rules-based international system and global defence of victims of human rights violations. It also highlights the importance of accountability in order to maintain human rights and demonstrates the significance of new sanction framework in its potential. It also hinders the activities of human rights abusers in countries that have serious human rights violations and puts pressures on violators to abide to legal framework and respect it. However, disadvantages include the power of these sanctions is in a collective application. Therefore, there is a strong need for other countries to adopt similar measures in order for it to be a global crackdown on human rights violations. Some nations may not have strong incentives to implement these sanctions fully regarding on relationships with certain countries. In my report, I go into France's relationship with various MENA relations and how if they included any of human rights abusers in any sanction framework from MENA regions, how that would impact their relationship with the country. Furthermore, global sanction framework also targets primarily perpetrators from Russia in more than those in the Gulf region, including Bahrain. Therefore, one can pose the question, how effective are the Magnitsky style sanction framework in ensuring accountability in Bahrain and the surrounding Gulf region countries? Further information has been discussed in my report, which will hopefully be made available to you soon. But this is a summary that I am giving you today. Yeah, thank you for allowing me to talk, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's discussion on the subject area. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. Thanks for doing that. I guess the one reaction I have, the one feeling I have about hearing what you had to say is that it's not justice. That for the people who suffered those violations in those countries in Bahrain, for an individual to be banned from going somewhere or having investments in a particular place, it doesn't mean they're actually held accountable. It's a kind of accountability for their actions, but one that is imposed by another state. And I think, as you kind of hinted at, that state may have political reasons in those countries in Bahrain to want to do it or to not want to do it. Right. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn to Carla Firstman, who's a professor in law at Essex University. And ask Carla for your reactions to our thoughts about the Magnitsky provisions, whether in your experience from the point of view of a kind of Bahraini, somebody who's gone through this process, whether that meets something that recognizes justice or accountability in any sort of way. And if it doesn't, what are the other options? What else can they do?
Thank you, jury, and it's great to be here. I would say when justice becomes really illusory, what we consider to be justice becomes much wider. So the way I look at the Magnitsky sanctions, it's part of a wide toolbox of possibilities that can serve some of the goals of justice, but certainly not all. But that doesn't make it good or bad or otherwise. It's part of, it's one of the mechanisms that can potentially be applied to obtain a measure of justice for persons who've had no justice. So from that perspective, I think it's quite important. The challenge that I see with it is that it's controlled by foreign states who determine whether, and if so, how to use it. So if we think about very serious violations of human rights, torture, arbitrary detention, killings, which we know are part of the Bicky report that we're referring to today. The Magnitsky sanctions are not going to be applied for certain if you have the most serious of those abuses. So if you, the Magnitsky sanctions will be applied if a government chooses to apply them. So the scale of horrificness of the abuses is not necessarily going to impact on a government's decision of whether or not to use them. So the fact that the mechanism is discretionary and it's not subject to any clear rules about when it's going to be applied in terms of the gravity of the offenses makes it a political tool rather than a legal tool. That doesn't mean it's not an important tool, but I would say it's more of it falls more into the category of politics than it does to law.
Okay, thanks for that. Put yourself in the shoes of a Bahraini and a former MP, Matar. Matar will join us in a minute, but Bicky report has been passed 10 years ago. It's been published. There were some prosecutions. They petered out. One of the chapters they account for deaths in custody, torture, not just of one individual, but many, scores. Prosecutions aren't happening. Goodness me, what's left? If you really want to have some justice, and I take your point. I think you said this is one measure, but even this, the Magnitsky provisions are one measure. We're not getting the other ones. If they're not going to go for Magnitsky, what are the other options from what you can tell in Bahrain? What's left in the hands of Bahrainis now to seek justice?
Well, I think the first thing is to see what kind of political pressure can be placed to implement the recommendations of the Bicky report. Just because they haven't been fully implemented up until now doesn't mean that they don't deserve the extensive attention needed to ensure that they can be implemented. If we think about the situation 10 years on, you have people who were arbitrarily detained, arrested, tortured, many still detained to this day. So the pressure really has got to be on seeing those people released. So that, in a way, you have a legal system. The legal system isn't functioning for a variety of reasons with respect to those cases. What's really needed is advocacy at the highest possible level, greater awareness raising internationally to put the pressure on the government to do what it actually can do, which is make its legal system work. It works in other areas. It should work on these cases too. That I would see as the main thing that needs to be done. In terms of international processes, certainly the documentation of cases so that if an alleged torturer is walking along the streets of France, that they can be prosecuted. Those are still useful possibilities. And the Magnitsky sanctions are additionally an important tool. If I recall correctly, years ago, and I see Tara has joined us, so perhaps she might remember this. But years ago, there was an effort to bring a commercial case against a Korean supplier of tear gas to stop the supply of tear gas to Bahrain. That's another type of mechanism, which isn't, let's say, the whole package of justice that any survivor of a horrific human rights abuse needs. But one needs to keep these possibilities in mind in order to make that progress. But I think advocacy and keeping the political pressure on the government of Bahrain is central to that.
Just to pick up on one point, Carla, if I've understood you correctly, you seem to also be saying that just because it's 10 years ago and it's not been followed through, that BICI, the BICI outcomes, the BICI recommendations remain in the field, in play. I mean, there's something to go for, something to push for, or is it the case, in your view, that 10 years have passed by? Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Salon for Democracy and Human, 80, all these organizations have said their piece. Nothing's happening. It's dead. It's basically dead, or not dead.
Well, my view is that 10 years more of arbitrary detention means that the human rights abuses are exacerbated. And I think that needs to be taken into account. 10 years without implementation is not great, but don't put the fault on the NGOs for their unsuccessful advocacy. More pressure on the government to implement those recommendations.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, although there's a lot more to be said about that. Thank you so much, Carla. We're going to go to Matar, a former MP, Bahrain. He was caught up in the events at that time in February, March of 2011, and went through some pretty horrific experiences, and subsequently took up his case with the IPU, Interparliamentary Union. Matar, could you just tell us a little bit about your experience and whether you think that the BICI report has led to any accountability, any justice, or if not, other options do you see as a Bahraini? What are some of your experiences, if you would, please, and then your thoughts about justice and accountability.
Yeah, so my overall experience, I feel I'm lucky because I had been released. I was able to leave. I don't live in fear. Others are still in prison. It worked partially for me to be able to be free. And when we talk about rehabilitation and justice for victims, I can mention that we follow all the process to raise the complaints about all what we faced during detention, and it didn't work. The government just ignored our complaint. And to talk about the situation there in 2011, it was very tough experience for me, and it was much worse for others. I remember when I was in solitary confinement under the ground for around more than 1 month. It was like hell on earth. I remember hearing the hallucination of victims every night, it was really very terrifying experience. To look at Biki and the implementation of recommendation, I can say there was a partial progress after this report. This report was just part of many multiple factors, but I consider it was a major one. When we look at the situation in 2011, there was mass firing for employees in different public sector and even private sectors. The torture, people who were killed under torture in prison, people who were killed using tear gas canisters when it was directed to them, or people who were killed with live ammunitions or with tear gas. Those were very common practices. We keep hearing the news about the victims day after day. And it went for a long time, even after the Biki report. But I think Biki report played a major role to see less blood in Bahrain. And as I said, there were multiple reasons, and Biki was one of them. But at the end, those improvements wasn't sustainable. So when we talk about the mass firing, we don't have mass firing for people in Bahrain anymore, as it was in 2011. But the government used different tactics to keep punishing those who were affiliated with the uprising, or even punishing people randomly just for their sects or their race. Another, I think, a positive side of the Biki was the medics, the physicians. They didn't get justice, but for them to be released and return back to practice, that was a big improvement compared to others who are still struggling and still suffering and still punished for their involvement in the uprising. Another decline was the protesters who were killed in 2017. So while I'm talking about the decline of the bloodshed in Bahrain, the decline of torture that led to death, 2017 was an exception where more than 5 protesters had been killed for no reason. They were unarmed, they didn't represent any threat, but it shows you how unsustainable the situation in Bahrain is. At any point, things can tend to be bloody again. So, so in summary, I can say that there were certain progress had been accomplished, but overall, the situation is not sustainable, and the government is seeking a new method of punishments. And I'm talking here about collective punishments for Bahrainis.
Malta, thanks for that. I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said it a couple of times, that improvements were not sustainable. Why weren't they sustainable? If there was a modicum of accountability and realization of things that went bad and they wanted to put it right, then wouldn't it have been sustainable? Why was it unsustainable?
So let me start by talking about our methodologies in the pro-democracy movement. We were looking at sustainability by looking at continuous international pressure. We were looking at sustainability by having legislations and having a constitution that preserve the rights and prohibit torture and discrimination. But it seems that I'm looking 10 years after the uprising, I'm not sure we were looking at the right tools. It is obvious that a continuous pressure to maintain sustainable respect for a human right is not really an option, especially in the Gulf. You know, the relation that all the Gulf countries have and the connection with the superpower in the world here. So it's not really an option. Another track was talking about legislations and talking about laws and constitution. And I'm also not sure that this is really a right track. Why I'm saying that? Because we look at our history. So we have a constitution in the 70s. The constitution stays for 3 years. So the constitution had been people voted on the constitution, and after the first election, the parliament had been dissolved, and working with constitution had been suspended for 30 years. So if we will get the perfect constitution and we don't have the means to protect it and to keep it implemented, it's not really the right approach to look at sustainability. Tomorrow the king can come and have a new BK report and give the commitments, and he can change the constitution, make a referendum about the constitution, and 1 week after, everything can collapse again. So coming back to your important question, what could be help to make change sustainable? Unfortunately, in Bahrain, we are talking about one-man show. It's a very centralized political structure. Previously, we were talking about powers inside the government. So we're talking, for example, about a camp for the prime minister, the previous prime minister, and another camp for the crown prince, a camp for al-Khawalid, a camp for the king. I don't think after 20 years of King Hamad in power, I don't think this is really relevant anymore. The king is everything. The crown prince, al-Khawalid, anyone who is affiliated to the previous prime minister, they are just details. But it's everything is systematic in Bahrain. The media, the violation, the progress. If any change will happen, it will be in a systematic, and it will be by order or approval from the king. So coming back to your question, it's all about a decision from the king. If the king decide to go for really a full resolution, it is his choice. It will not be fully sustainable, but at least it will be sustainable until he changes his mind or we get a new king. But maybe this is the most sustainable thing we can think about at this point.
Mata, we're running out of time, but I'm a little bit shocked by one thing that you said, and although I recognize it being true by suggesting that following up kind of legislative agenda, a rule of law agenda in order to change society to make it better, and by categorically saying you're not sure that you're on the right track, Mata, you're saying, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, you're saying it's a country that's not one that abides by the rule of law.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, I wish
Okay.
we are in a situation where people in a small island have the means to protect a democratic process that can maintain inequality, dignity, security for everybody. But unfortunately, this is not the case.
Wow. Okay. So a lot to take on there. You've also really categorically said it's basically all about the king and as a kind of political enterprise, a political project. And I think that brings us pretty neatly to the work of Marc Pelas. We've moved quite a bit from the notions of justiciable notions in Bahrain itself. We kind of didn't get very far with that. Magnitsky is an option. We've moved quite a bit towards questions of legitimacy and political questions, straightforward political questions. Marc Pelas, journalist for Le Monde Diplomatique since 1973, expert on the Gulf, apart from being a maths teacher at a very high level. From what you've been hearing, Marc, what are your thoughts about the question of accountability or the role of Magnitsky sanctions in the question of Bahrain?
As it has been said, the initiative is relying on alias, on political opportunities, on things which are not relevant of justice, which shows a clear limitation. Well, it can give services if it is, and sometimes I have what should be seen is that what are the wrong uses that may be done of the tool, as we know that not all good uses shall be activated. Will be activated. What wrong uses might be done. I didn't notice yet anyone. I guess there should be some. This should be the first concern, given the limitation for range of action. But the real danger is the bad uses. But the bad uses, if you stand on a principled position where human rights, which are so much harassed nowadays, must be a kind of prerequisite of political reflections, then you don't fear too much the bad uses. That's all I have to say on the subject.
Marc, in your Le Monde Diplomatique article, which has been translated into English, Le Monde Diplomatique English edition, you delve into other areas of Bahraini life, the role of the governments in the economy and so on. And I wonder if, I wonder if reading between the lines, what you're saying kind of supports what Matar was saying, was that the role of government or the king and the court is one that that overrides the rule of law. Is that how you see things as well?
Well, when you contacted me, you said that we will have a central question that will be accountability. I said, oh, it's a very nice thing. We can. I have eventually something to say on accountability, which will be a kind of retro quoting, but it's all the more important that accountability is one of those concepts which ends with a Y and not ISM, and which are all useful for gauging, for appreciating a very, very central thing that has been maybe a bit under patrolled for Bahrain, which is legitimacy. And in the recent November article you were going to quote, I had written up something about legitimacy, but unfortunately it was a bit extra volume for the article, and it has been cut, although it is written, and it has been cut, but it is a good thing that it has been cut. The reason was it was too long, and also that it is like a kind of exercise, to something to exercise together to look the legitimacy. So I will make some basic recall on the subject. I just say on accountability, you have, as I make an article on Bahrain every 8 years, like a metronome. In the 2005 article, you have this kind of cascade of hurdles that were brought by the new constitution, making sure that any will of the people will never go in a law, will never be transformed in law against the will of the power. So we say in French, ceinture et bretelle, belt and harness, shoulder harness, when there is a double security. Here you don't have ceinture et bretelle, you have multiple belts, shoulder harness, braces, safety bag, everything. Because if you want to see how a will from the people who will get into a law against the will of the regime, you have to see that it has to go through the limitations of the electoral corps with the naturalizations, Saudi voters and so on. Then after this hurdle or wall, you have the fact that you have this mobility of the affiliates of the regime that can be targeted on the circumscription, on the constituencies which are in risk of swing. Then you have, of course, general gerrymandering with 1 to 6 needs of votes according and so on. Then you have the fact that this extraordinary thing, only Bahrainian thing, that a will of 64% of the people with a high turnover gives only 18 seats in the National Assembly in the last open election in November 2008. In any country with something a bit likely democracy, you will have 64% that will give 95% of the seats, or 90 and so on. Here you have 64%, which give 18 over 40. This shows how it is. So you have this gerrymandering of the constituencies. Then you have the fact that the 40 of the National Assembly are regulated or obstructed by the 40 of the so-called Shura. I had a discussion sometime with a woman who was from the Shura. She was presenting herself as a parliament member. What is a parliament member? If you are a kind of affiliate of the king and you are nominated as such, you will say in the UK it exists, but not with the same prerogatives as in Bahrain. The Shura has the capacity of obstructing, and you know, this is in the 2005 article, you know that if there is a discordance between National Assembly and Shura, there should be a 2/3 majority. Means that you have to, it is impossible to impose anything as long as you have half of the 80, 40 plus 40 who are nominated. Then you have the fact that the king is controlling the agenda, and you have the fact that is sovereignly signing any law. So you have a kind of pathway of hurdles or walls, in fact, at with six steps, which makes that there is no accountability when there can be nothing. So this is for accountability, but accountability is something which is well understood. On the other hand, legitimacy is not. Legitimacy is something which has been popularized under the term of sociological legitimacy at the beginning of last century by Max Weber in Economy and Society. And the first author who dealt really with the subject of legitimacy in the Arab world was Michael Hudson, who wrote Arab Politics, The Search for Legitimacy in '77, which has a good approach, which is still, which is not obsolete today of the subject. So I think that everyone who is interested of Bahrain might now, either is a student, academic and so, work on this, because this is underworked and it has to be fed up by different contribution. I will try to make a kind of start for this. Max Weber said legitimacy has three dimensions, three pillars, three pillars, which are the possibility of power to be legitimate. You can analyze its relation to tradition. Second, its relation to charisma, and third, its relation to rationality. Tradition, it has been here in this country for centuries and so on, and it is a de facto. Charisma, this is dignified people who deserve the admiration of everyone for their moral qualities. Rationality, it is people, when they manage the country, they do it with rational choices. They explain their choices. Their choices are taken, so and so. So you have this kind of analytic approach, the three pillars, and you have the other one that was done. I have looked this by Ted Gurr. Ted Gurr in 1970 said, well, legitimacy can also be the the quality of a power which is perceived by its citizens as adequate and proper to deserve obedience. This is very strong, very synthetic, very strong. Is it adequate, and is it worse to be obeyed? Is it felt as worse to be obeyed? Okay, with all these two ways in the three pillars and this synthetic, we can make much work, and you can look. You put the three columns, tradition, charisma, rationality, and you see everything that does the regime, and you say, well, for this they are good, for this they are bad, and so on. And you can nearly make a gauge, have the scope very openly, and this can be discussed. You can see what resorts for authority, for identity, for equality. I mentioned rationality, accountability. You can have some also other values, which are political participation, which are use of excessive violence, use of excessive violence. Well, we are inside the subject, and we can do a very good job all together. The students, the academics, we can work on this, and we have a very good luck that we have this gauge. In November 2010, 64% for WIFAC, which for me, French citizen from far, is only the most important party or so-called party of only the legitimate opposition, the tolerated, the licensed opposition, and there is another opposition of Republicans and so on and so on and so on. So only the main party of the main part of the opposition, that we are men of the men, 64%. So we have a gauge. There is a problem of legitimacy which is directly readable, and it is a peculiarity of Bahrain, because there has been this kind of erratic move, which is a kind of errance between looking for what I call an historical compromise with an opposition which is cooperative, non-violent. This is very precious for a power. You have a non-violent cooperative which accepts the rule of the majority, provided this minority gives some signs of democracy, political participation, share of power limited, and so on. And you don't take it. You don't take it because you want everything, and then you crush, and then you do what you said in 2000, Matar in 2017. Fact that we don't know why. And then there are those markets that were passed, that we know, millions of tear gas that were purchased for some tens of thousands citizens targeted, or even a few hundred. This is absolutely crazy.
Okay, Mac, we've come up past 15 minutes of it. Like, look, I think what strikes me about what you've been saying is, frankly, if you don't mind me saying this, you have demolished a notion of legitimacy, both from a theoretical and very practical perspective. You're drawing on Weber and so on, and then also the 64% of the vote and so on. Are you then saying totally imperfect situation that there is, are you saying that government's not legitimate?
Are you saying that I didn't got what you said?
I'm asking you that if you think that the government's legitimacy is compromised, is already very weak, therefore, not the people provide accountability, and if they're not the people to provide accountability, who should?
Who should provide accountability?
Yeah, who should provide accountability for all the things that happened in 2011 through to now, through including 2017, including, as you say, prisoners of conscience, political prisoners who continue to be detained to this time. If, you know, so maybe they're not the right people to give accountability, to process accountability, who can, maybe they can't even provide it. And do you think that? And if you think that, then who should?
Well, of course, I don't ignore the regional situation, the insularity, the fact that the country is economically dependent of its neighbors, and the fact that its neighbors are, as I wrote in the article, people which are called sometimes by themselves or by others radical rivals, have this strong certitude that in matters of politics, society, and the economy, quote, nothing must be won through collective action or demands, for everything is granted by the monarch. So the question is that although everywhere there is a tension between a royal power, there can be a tension between a royal power, either dictatorial or authoritative and so on, authoritarian, there can be a tension. Here, the only fact, this is what we saw with Mrs. Athul in Saudi Arabia, which was driving a car, but which was in jail for years because she was driving a car at a moment where, when the heir apparent was considering that it was time to let women drive car, but it should not come from the action of a woman. If so, she had to go to jail. It should come from him. So you have this tension, and you have this surrounding. So there is a need for a special approach that would allow an historic compromise to, I mean, the cape be swinged to more compromise, because the situation of Bahrain is a deadlock. It can't be this way. You can't have a regime which takes only by the facts of the foreign troops, which is, by the way, a very strong mark of Lao legitimacy, presence of foreign troops in the country, which is by foreign troops and so on. But you have to acknowledge the situation, and this is, I guess, the responsibility of the dynasty to find its way, as Oman has found its way. Oman is maybe not a paradise, but in terms of legitimacy, many people know as how heavy I was engaged against Oman, and the complete lack of legitimacy of Sultan Qaboos when he came to power. But this man, little by little, gained some legitimacy by his policy, which I will not. He killed less people than others. He did it less freely than others. He gave more. He kept less money than others around for himself. He used social control that was so strong.
Yeah. Okay, Mark. We're going down to Omani roots. Let's. I want to take some of your thoughts, or what I understand to be. Thank you for all that. Thank you for those thoughts. We've come up to the hour mark. We've only got half an hour left maximum. I'm hoping that if anyone is monitoring any questions or comments that are being conveyed via YouTube or through Twitter, that they can be conveyed to me through WhatsApp or some other means. That would be really helpful. Or just flag them here if you would. But right now, I want to go back. I want to take some of your thoughts about this compromised legitimacy that I sense very strongly from you, Mark, and put that back to Carla first, who has a legalistic, I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, Carla, or not, kind of more of a human rights take on it. And on the back of what you've heard from what Mark has had to say and his views about state structure and so on, does that change your views? I mean, I guess one of my takeaways from what Mark has had to been saying is that this state, this entity, this government has kind of no legitimacy anyway. It's got no. It's not in a super strong position in order to grant accountability. It's not likely to grant any sort of accountability for actions that its own officials took. So therefore, come full circle back to what Amelie started us with and say, well, bloody hell, all we're left with is trying to get some states in the West, mostly the West, to say, actually, what went down in 2011 through to right now was unacceptable, and that these officials from that state should be banned from entering the United States, UK, European Union, Australia, whatever. What are your thoughts on the basis of what Mark had to say, and how do they link with the whole question of accountability?
Well, firstly, thank you, Mark, for setting out your points so clearly. I think when I listened to what you were saying, Mark, my response would be, well, yes, of course. In a sense, the government is where it is with legitimacy at a very low level. But that doesn't mean we should look at it as an absolute, that it's not capable of change. And I think I approach these things more from the perspective of an advocate. Advocacy can happen from within, and it can happen from outside. So some advocacy from within may not be possible because it may be judged to have no practical effect right now, or some advocacy from within may be really important right now. And I think, going back to Makar's comments, one really needs to look at what are the possibilities, what is the scope for strengthening advocacy on certain key goals, not the main goal, not the prize, but one needs to think about how to open up civil space a little bit more. One needs to think about stopping some of the key violations. One needs to think about getting more people released from arbitrary detention. There are certain key things that need to happen, I think. So I would look at that both from the perspective of what is possible to make progress on in the short term, midterm, And then from the outside, it's about pressure. But with respect to your comment, Drury, about let's get some Western states involved to issue sanctions. Well, I think one needs to be a little bit realistic about where the alignments are of certain Western states in terms of the likelihood that they will issue certain sanctions. I think the political analysis needs to be done with respect to that. And that's something where perhaps we need to be realistic. But also the Bicky report needs more engagement at the United Nations. It needs more engagement in other kind of more global regional forums. And I don't think one should give up on that. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I don't see that there's any fundamental difference in view. In a way, the political analysis of where Bahrain is, I mean, that stands. But what does one do about it? How does one respond, inside and outside?
Yeah, no, I guess, thanks, Carla. I guess the thing I take away from that, I mean, you're quite right about the political realities of the opportunities or possibilities of getting a Magnitsky designation. It's just not going to happen from Britain. Maybe slightly more likely from the US. I'm not sure. Maybe it's some lower level people by the European Union. When I spoke to the sanctions team in the European Union on previous occasions, they've said go to try to target the individuals closest to the gravest violation possible. The higher up you go on the kind of political food chain, the less likely you're going to be to get that passed, at least in the European Union, where there are 27 states or something that have got to decide on that. It's incredibly difficult to see that happening. I guess the main thing my takeaway from what you've just said, and we're coming up on 10 past the hour, and we'll probably give it another sort of 10 minutes or so, is something which I think you and Matar were getting at, is take the advocacy successes, or generate the advocacy successes where you can generate them. And that's my kind of some takeaway of kind of what you're saying, is that the government is what it is, legitimacy is what it is. It doesn't mean you pack up shop and go home or try to put all your eggs in a Magnitsky or a justiciable kind of imagination of what Bicky could be. You kind of work at it. You need to work at it. With that in mind, and having heard those previous two contributions, Matar, just to come back to you as well. You heard what Mark had to say about legitimacy. I think it dovetails pretty closely to some element of what you were saying as well. What are your thoughts about what advocacy options there remain to us? I mean, as Carla quite rightly said, are we really going to be able to get the old colonial power to impose restrictions on leaders? Goodness me, it looks like a long shot.
I think the global advocacy and reaching the Western countries shouldn't be the priority. I think the priority should be more on local and regional, and it's hard. I'm not saying this is an easiest path, but I find it more effective even if the outcome is limited and not that much meeting the challenges that we are facing. Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Yeah, I can hear you
Matar,
now.
thanks for that. Sorry about that. Tara O'Grady, who's been involved with Bahraini matters for quite some time, is on the line. Tara, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Drury.
You had indicated you wanted to put a question to one or all of the panelists.
If I could,
and
please.
Jawad has got a comment as well after.
Okay, just very quickly, and really it's directed at Carla. Hi, Carla. Long time. I heard Mark mention about the peculiarity of Bahrain, and they're really pushing for the kind of window dressing of legitimacy. Yesterday, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier because I came a little late to the meeting, which I apologize for, but they hosted Antonio Gutierrez yesterday at the Bahraini embassy in Washington, D.C. for a business meeting. And, you know, this is a gentleman who is Portuguese, he's socialist, he's been involved in socialism from, you know, back in the very early 70s. And it is, it really kind of mocks the human rights process when they won't allow special rapporteurs into the country, when they have left Vicky far behind and don't seem to be bringing it up at all. And yet they will court Mr. Gutierrez in the States. So I find that quite peculiar personally. And then I wanted to ask just your impression on that. And then we talked also, I heard you talking about accountability and lack of accountability. There were two things specifically that I wanted to inquire for your opinion about on that. There are hundreds of people who have been pushed into vulnerability from Bahrain, and they have created refugees. Now, I've never heard of a country removing the nationality of its native citizens. And this, I think, is another element of their peculiarity. So while we look at, as Matar had said, there have been some improvements, although they haven't been sustainable, the lack of political will on that. And in contrast, there is this extraordinary political will to polarize dissenting voices. And the final thing, if you can just bear with me on this, I know that it will be rather a wordy answer. I have a list in front of me of 199 martyrs over the last 10 years, including 2011 up until to date. 199 martyrs, and in those names, there are dozens of infants and miscarriages, named miscarriages, that were specifically as a result of the tear gas blanketing, which was used in communal reprisals. We have had no accountability for any of those things. And I just wanted to ask you your opinion of how to seek legitimate accountability from the outside in, because as you all know, it's impossible inside. So with regards to legislation, we're all agreed, it seems, that the legislation is not legitimate inside the country, and that the monarch himself is the one who holds all of the aces with regards to allowing a change. And we're talking about advocacy really as our last resource, and how to create some pressure from outside. Carla, really to yourself, if I could direct that. And Matar, if you have any comments, and thank you for giving me the platform, Drury.
Where to start? Firstly, I would say with respect to courting UN officials, and the first part of your question, I think part of the advocacy has got to be advocacy to the UN, to remind the UN of what it's got to say and when and how, and to remind it of anniversaries of certain things that it should be bringing up. That could be quite helpful and would have a natural impact on the type of events and how they would, on the kind of situation which you've talked about. So I think in a way one needs to be much more targeted. One shouldn't necessarily look at the UN simply as a body that might assist in affording help with accountability, but look at it as a political actor, advocate towards it. And I think that can be really helpful, seeing it that way. On the issue of citizenship, unfortunately, Bahrain is not the only country, but it's a horrible practice. But I know UNHCR was involved at the early stages when that law or that process began, and it would be interesting to kind of continue this. So from again, advocacy towards the UN, trying to ensure that they continue the pressure on the governments. But yes, certainly that's an issue. And then with respect to actual cases, of course, there's a law on statelessness. So with respect to the persons who managed to get out of the country, there is a need to ensure that signatories to the Statelessness Convention take appropriate steps in relation to that. In the third point, advocacy from outside. I just think at the first level, one needs to make sure that the awareness is at the highest possible level. And that gives advocacy the most possible success, particularly with Western governments. So I would say greater media attention would be really important. So we have esteemed journalist in our midst this evening. Advocate with him to write stories on these issues, because actually international media attention on them will be really important in terms of how they get taken up and the extent to which governments around the world feel compelled to act. So those are just a few first reflections.
Thanks, Carla. Mata, did you want to, or Mata first, and then maybe Mark as well, before going to Jawad? We've got about 10 minutes left. But Mata, is it, that quite a big thing that Tara has set out actually. But do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and not specifically about what Tara mentioned, but if you don't mind, I'd like just to talk quickly about the priority for the advocacy work. So when it comes to the quick win, I think one of the area will be maybe the stateless. So the stateless is really a problem that is going on for a long time. And I think we can have multiple allies on this issue. And having equal rights for women when it comes for citizenship, where women can pass their citizenship for their kids. This issue is causing really a lot of suffer for a lot of women in Bahrain. And I find this area an area that is not really, it doesn't have a political threat and challenge for the government. So that's why I think I encourage to focus on it. Revoking the citizenship is another area as well. The government is gaining little by, if they are getting anything, by revoking citizenship. It's a limited problem for limited people without any impact on the government. The government is losing nothing by fixing the problem of citizenship. So I think those areas that it's worth to focus on.
Thanks, Matteo. Got just under 10 minutes left. Mark, did you want to add anything. I see that Carla put it back on your shoulders to write more about it. And yeah, you are an esteemed journalist. You're great. Your articles have been fantastic. Through the years have been brilliant. I mean, unfortunately, maybe I wish more people listened to you. Do you have any thoughts on what Tara had to say? And then Jawad, I'll come to you, come back to you, and then maybe come back to everyone for one final bit of thought.
I shall limit myself to two minor footnotes. The first one, of course, which I should have said, is that political legitimacy must be, of course, distinguished from legality. Legality is something completely different. Legality is the efficiency of the power, the membership in international organizations, the capacity to have embassies and so on. So it is not, of course, a question of legality. And the second is that I would like to apologize because we had a few technical problems in the afternoon for connections, and I could not prepare my English language warm-up that would have made me a little more fluent and not repetitive on a few things. Sorry for that.
Mais pourtant, c'est formidable. Hein? Ne vous inquiétez pas.
Okay.
Jawad, you indicated that you wanted to come in. Oh, sorry, Mark. Did you want to say something after? Your English is perfect, by the way. Don't worry about that. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, there's nothing
Okay.
I want to add. It's only that maybe there is an underestimation of the purely political analysis that are done by the Bahraini diaspora. They should look at political issues. Analysis more deeply, because they are the human rights, which are, of course, of first importance. They are the many things which are addressed, but the fact to characterize the regimes which you face in order to be better able to anticipate its moves and also to deal with it, if deal there should be, but I think there should be to some extent, is also an important task.
Mark, thank you very much. Jawad, you wanted to make a few comments, and bear in mind we have just under 7 minutes left. So if we can finish a little bit before time, that would be great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make it very short. On 23rd December 2016, there was a woman called Iman Salehi. She was driving a car with her kid in Rafah area. By sudden, one of the ruling family's member chased her and stopped her, then asked her that to have a date. She refused. Then on cold blood, she been killed on the spot. Yet we don't know what happens, and no one is being accountable for it. Today, since the independent day of Bahrain, none of Al Khalifa has been taken to the court. We never heard that such abuses, corruptions, and all, let me say, Al Khalifa's members are involved in the executive body and the security and the military, and many of their names has been indicated by the victims that are being tortured by some Al Khalifa's members, family, and so on. But none of them has been taken to the court. Never we heard any type of the accountability. Even during the period which been so-called reform period, which been launched by the king in 2001, let us say it up to 2011, we couldn't hear that at all. Even while we were there in the parliament, we raised the cases so clearly I myself indicated so many cases to the Minister of Interior, who still is Minister of Interior, but no such action has been taken. So for sure, there is no political will at all to take even the minor level of the accountability. Why? Because it is so clear that if they're going to start it, then it will escalate to the higher level, and they don't want. Even they try to protect those who are committed so much unhuman acts with regard to torture, abuses, and so on. And everything is so clear. I'm gonna bring up my case, for example, when I made so clear to all officials in the country after I've been released, me and Matar, on the 7th August 2011. I deliberately wrote my testimony details and send it as a registered letter to the King, to the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Minister of Justice, Minister of Interior, public prosecutor, military, everyone. Not only that, I already made a press release in the local media during that time, which banned later on Al-Wasat, asking them to go and make investigation what happens. My case even is given as a testimony in Biki reports, testimony number 52. It is so clearly indicated that. But yet, instead of demanding the details and asking me to give my testimony, public prosecutor, they neglected it. Military prosecutor, they asked me to give my testimony. I given it, but during the testimony, it was clear indication they want to hide the proof. They want to hide whatever I know, more than to look after it. And at the end, I can see myself that my nationality has been revoked and I'm living in exile. So it is so clear there is no political will at all to have any type of this type of accountability. Who I am blaming? I'm blaming mainly the allies of Bahrain. I am sure Bahrain could be in better position and could be somehow reforms to be imposed on Bahrain if international allies of Bahrain are somehow they are willing to do so, mainly UK and United States. But it's look like even their political way is trying to protect their interests more than human rights values. Thank you.
Goodness me. I was hoping for some degree of hope this evening. There's very little. Mark, I see what you're waving your feet. We've only got like a minute left.
Yes.
So if you're very brief.
What said Jawad is give me the idea that we must identify and say to the ruling family that they've not all the way open for doing anything institutional, diplomatical, economical, and so on. That's true. They are constrained, and we must. But they can define the field in which they can sovereignly improve their legitimacy by reducing corruption, embezzlement, arrogance, torture. When a member of a royal family says to one of his stooge who is in a bit worrying that he has be torturing someone, and he speaks in front, and this member says, you have, what you do is legal because I tell you I am legal, and I tell you what you do is legal. What is the future of such a sentence? The future, the man is to be killed because he heard that, or he will go out and say that. There is no interest to for the head of the royal family to live to leave the young dogs of the family do anything against the people, because this is pumping the legitimacy. You see, excessive violence is of the male responsibility of the family, and this is what they must work first.
Well, maybe something to end on. I guess I feel like I'm a constant student of Bahrain. I've only been working on this sort of issue and statelessness, indeed, for 5 short years. Worked on other country situations long before that. But I guess the extent that there's anything positive, or maybe not positive is the right word, but something that we can take away that's kind of actionable, at least that I feel that we can take away for Salam for democracy and human rights, is, and I think, Carla, you referred to it, Matar, you referred to it, Mark, I think you, in a way, you kind of referred to it, but a little less, is look for where we can actually make a difference. And in that, I don't want to rule out the Magnitsky provisions. We haven't tried, so I've been slowly, on the basis of what Amelie wrote, I've been filling in the very helpful template that your former employers, Carla, have put together. The redress has got a template for Magnitsky submissions to the UK government. I don't think we have all the information that we need in order to carry it out. But it's one thing. It's one thing that we can do. But I guess the quick, it may not be a quick win that Matar referred to about statelessness, but it's certainly one that has got a lot of international traction. And in this regard, like, for example, for those of us living here in the UK and in Europe, Salam for Democracy and Human Rights has just been appointed to, correct me if I'm wrong, Jawad, the advisory board of the European Network on Statelessness, in order to get that voice in, the Bahraini and kind of Gulf voice into the European framework, which is really, really great. Any final thoughts? We're just slightly run over time. I see there's something in the chat. Any final things anyone wants to pitch in with? Extremely brief. You can shake your head or just remain silent if you like. That's silence. Okay. Listen, thank you all. I don't know what kind of viewership this will have garnered. It's maybe quite a niche project, niche thing. Amelie, just to end off, I'm going to reflect a little bit on what people have been saying tonight, and maybe add that to the text. Maybe not in the text itself, but as a preface as we launch your reports tomorrow. Take this as the launch of your text. Thank you so much for preparing it. Thank you all for coming along. Mark, Carla, Matar, early in the morning for you. Thank you so much for that. And Carla, staying late at night, and Mark too. Thank you all for taking part. Thanks Tara for joining us too. And hopefully speak to you soon. And if there's any follow-up, I'll come back to you all by email, I expect. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.